Hello and welcome to Talking Tudors, a fortnightly podcast about the ever-fascinating Tudor dynasty. My name is Natalie Grueninger and I'll be your host and guide on this journey through 16th century England. Are you ready to step through the veil of time into the dazzling and dangerous world of the Tudor court? Without further ado, it's time to talk Tudors. Hello everyone, welcome back to Talking Tudors, episode 31. I'm your host, Natalie Grueninger. Before we get started, as always, I'd like to thank the wonderful patrons who very generously pledged to support this podcast. A very big thank you to Andy and Joanna, Christina, Sharon, Jenny, Julie, Noelle, Raluca, Dawn and Daniel. Thank you so much Leslie, Katie, Jenny G, Shah, Beth, Carol, Caroline, Sally, Haynes and Stephanie. A huge thank you to Stacey, Callan, Marcus, Lauren, Denise, Can, Sandy, James, Jenna, Leah and Jenna. Thank you very much Milena, Taylor, Katie, Sahara and Antonio. If you love Talking Tudors and would like to show your appreciation and support the work I do, just click on the Be My Patron on Podbean badge on the homepage of my website www.onthetudortrail.com or click on the Be a Patron button on the Podbean app. Join the Talking Tudors patron family before the end of May and you'll be automatically entered into our patron-only monthly giveaways. This month's prize is a copy of In the Footsteps of the Six Wives of Henry VIII, co-authored by Sarah Morris and myself, plus 2 fabulous digital mini guides from the TudorTravelGuide.com, one of their Tudor Day Out collection and another from their Tudor Weekend Away range. A huge thank you to Sarah Morris, aka the Tudor Travel Guide, for sponsoring this amazing prize. Now, on to today's episode. I'm delighted that joining me on the show to talk about Elizabeth I and the Dutch Republic is Dr Sonja Kleij. Sonja received her PhD from Queen's University Belfast and is currently working as a lecturer in comparative literature at Utrecht University, where her main task is to teach early modern European history and culture. She's working on her first monograph on Anglo-Dutch Spanish politics in English and Dutch drama in the long 17th century and is developing a new project on European afterlives of the 1588 Armada. My conversation with Sonja straight after this short musical break, courtesy of guitarist Jon Sayles. Welcome to Talking Tudors, Sonja. How are you?
I'm good, Natalie. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, it would be wonderful if we could start by you just telling us a little bit about yourself and your background, please.
Okay, well, I'm a comparative literature scholar by training, and I specialize in the long 17th century. So kind of start with Elizabeth's reign, and then I move up to the 17th century, and I do Anglo-Dutch Spanish relations in that. So even though my main focus has always been literature and culture, there's a lot of history involved in my research. So that really got me interested in this topic and in this era.
Fantastic. So was there a specific sort of moment that you can remember, or something that sparked your interest in the Tudors and Elizabethan era? Was it just like a gradual coming to it for you?
I think it's a gradual coming to it for me. Like, I've always loved history, and growing up, whenever we would go on holiday, we would always visit the castles, and we'd always visit these sites, and you'd hear all these amazing stories of these figures, these political figures. And I think I did kind of have a strong interest in Elizabeth because she is such a fascinating woman. Absolutely. The story of her life is so great as well. Like some of these stories in history, you can make it up. Like, it's so...
No, that's right.
Exactly. I just really love a good plot in that sense. But history gives so many really great stories in that regard. And Elizabeth is a very powerful one. She's always a figure that kind of stuck with me.
Right. Okay, and what in particular? So I know you've spent some time researching Elizabeth and her court and the 17th century, as you've mentioned. So what drew you to more specifically to Elizabeth's story? What is it that you connect with there, or that you find intriguing?
What I find very intriguing is how practical-minded she seems to have been. Her political decisions were, I think, through a certain regard, always made with a certain practicality in mind. Yeah. For example, the fact that she decided not to get married, I think there's a certain practicality there as well, because she knew it would cause trouble for her reign in the long run, it seems. And she ultimately decided that that was not the way she wanted to go. She would solve that issue differently. And when it comes to her engaging in war, a lot of international relations, she was also very practical. She was thinking of, like, do we actually have the money? Am I exposing myself and my country to undue risk, or would it actually be more risky not to get involved? And that's where the Anglo-Dutch relation very much comes in, with, of course, the threat of Spain, where ultimately, after lots of hesitation, and people keep saying, oh, she wasn't decisive, I think she was just kind of waiting it out, like, do I really have to engage in a very pricey war with the most powerful country in Europe? And ultimately she was like, yes, okay, this is worth the risk, I should get engaged. But that really she really considers these kind of options, and instead of some monarchs who just kind of rush into it or just do it for the glory, as her father did. So that's something that I find very, very intriguing about her, how practical she was in those things, and how she really cared about being a good monarch to her people and to her country. Which is, can also be quite refreshing to see in a politician.
Absolutely, especially in this day and age that we're living in now, I think. So a lot of the work that you've done is sort of focused on the Dutch Republic as well, and that connection with Elizabeth. So how did the Dutch view Elizabeth and her court?
They really seem to have loved Elizabeth.
Right.
There are a lot of different images of her which portray her quite positively circulating at the time. So there's quite a few versions, for example, of where they've changed the kind of represented the Dutch Republic in the form of a cow. Had lots of dairy products in the Netherlands, so the cow seemed a natural way of portraying it. And you have like Philip trying to ride it, and he's kind of harming it with its spores. But Elizabeth is feeding it hay. So Elizabeth is the one who's actually helping and feeding the cow, and apparently one of these paintings is actually sent to her, because there is a Spanish ambassador who at one point writes back to Philip, basically reporting on him, how terribly he's portrayed in this painting, and isn't it all a bit ridiculous? So it must have been at court at some point as well, this painting, and it's kind of, we don't really know who made it, but one of the theories is that they sent it to her early on when they were trying to get her to become their official ally. That's how you woo a woman, you send her a painting of her feeding a cow.
Yes.
But apparently she at least used it to kind of irk the Spanish ambassador a little bit, so it must have had some effect. And there's also quite a lot of portrayals in, for example, songs where she is kind of there. She's a protector of sorts. She's a protector of the Netherlands, and she's very much a Protestant queen. She isn't afraid of Philip. She isn't afraid of the Pope either. She welcomes refugees. She's very welcoming, very strong, protecting figure. And in that sense, I think especially in the beginning, it's kind of how the Dutch viewed her. They looked to her for support, and they actually received it. And no matter what other troubles there may have been between the two, that's the image that kind of persists of her being their Protestant protector of sorts.
Right. And the painting that you're referring to, does that survive, or is that just from records?
There are some versions. There's a print. There's also one painting that does survive. It's in the Rijksmuseum. I'm very happy to send you a link later on if any of the listeners would like to see it. Because I'm not sure if on the online version you can see it, but on the actual painting they actually wrote above in English what every figure was supposed to be,
right?
And how they were kind of supposed to be interpreted. So it's, they were trying to really get this message across of like, we love you. Yeah. These other people, a little bit less.
So just in case the viewer misinterpreted it, it was all there.
Exactly. And they made sure to do that in English, just to make absolutely sure that it was all interpreted well.
Oh, how wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to see that, definitely.
Yeah, I'll send you the link. It's a really funny painting, I think.
Yeah, no, it sounds really funny. Now I want to delve a little bit further into sort of Elizabeth and the Dutch Republic. Could you talk to us about what the Dutch Revolt was and what role England played in this early on?
Absolutely. So the Dutch Revolt it's like all conflicts, it has its complications. So originally, Philip II's father, Charles V, he was the Holy Roman Emperor, he was the King of Spain, and he was kind of the Duke of the Netherlands, and he had gained all these territories through inheritance. And then when he decides to abdicate, one of his sons becomes Holy Roman Emperor, and Philip takes up Spain and the Netherlands. And the Netherlands had always kind of functioned on its own. The 7 provinces had kind of their own little governments, and they were used to having their privileges. They were used to having relative freedom. Like even when Charles was trying to keep the country Catholic, he didn't always enforce all the edicts that he actually set. But Philip was very keen on being kind of more of an absolute monarch. He needed Antwerp for the money. He was very keen on keeping everybody Catholic, so he was actually fully intent on enforcing all of those edicts. And there was even potentially threat of sending the Spanish Inquisition over.
Gosh.
So the Dutch nobles were like, can we just sort of keep things as they were? Can we just do our own little business and pay the taxes we used to? And Philip was very much, no, you're going to pay the taxes I said you're going to follow my rules. And Philip was very much seen as a foreign king who didn't understand his people, and he was trying to force all these, this oppression onto them. And then eventually part of that kind of outrage became the iconoclasm, and things kind of escalate from there. Philip sends over several people, including the Duke of Alba. He's the most notorious one to kind of try and set things right. The Duke of Alba actually ends up setting up what he called the Council of Troubles, but what the Dutch called the Council of Blood.
Right.
And in about 5 years, about, I think, 800 people eventually get tried and executed for treason and heresy. So even Catholics at this point are also like, this is not good for our country. This is not what we want. So they kind of rally together. They firstly send in a petition. They present that to Philip's sister, the Duchess of Parma. And she is... Duchess of Parma, and they give her a petition, and they are laughed away at court, and they are called legus, or beggars in French.
Right.
And eventually she does sign it, and she says to Philip, you should probably listen to them, but Philip ignores her as well. But by that point, because it has been ignored, and because they were laughed at, they take up that name, legus, and they use it as their rebel name, and that's when it kind of they start a guerrilla war of sorts. And a big part of that is at sea. They call them the sea beggars. And they actually have their ports in England in the beginning.
Right,
so
okay.
They are allowed to harbor their ships there and kind of use that as their base so that they can raid the coast and eventually start to conquer some cities. And so from then, for a couple of years, it is a guerrilla warfare where it's like Spain takes a city, and the Dutch take it back, and then Spain tries to get it back, and there's a whole thing. And Philip tries to send over several people, and they're very success. The problem is also Spain is kind of going bankrupt a couple of times as well, so the soldiers aren't paid, and they end up looting the country, and so it's a very messy conflict. It's not a standard kind of war where you have your one army against the other one. that's all kind of shaping up, and the Dutch is slowly developing itself into an independent entity. But it didn't start out as a war for independence. It started out as a conflict for their what they viewed as their rights back.
Right. Yeah.
And it eventually escalated into a war for independence. And England was very important, especially in the beginning, as just having that kind of home base somewhere where they can have their ships, and not have to worry about anybody taking them, so that they could raid the sea. And eventually the North Sea became so unsafe for Spanish ships that all reinforcements had to come through land, which, as you can imagine, is quite inconvenient as well, because it's so distance. So that was the very early on importance of England, just the fact that they could just be there.
Yeah, to have their base there. And what, so I wonder how Philip felt about, obviously, Elizabeth supporting them or allowing them or turning a blind eye. I don't know exactly how it was, but what did he think about that?
He was not too amused. No. He was not too amused. The Spanish ambassador, of course, frequently was kind of like, they're rebels, you should maybe not support them. And Elizabeth was kind of like, well, they're just kind of in my port, it's fine. And of course, Elizabeth felt some kinship, because eventually, especially the Seabackers were very Calvinist. So you start to see that Protestant link a little bit. And of course, also Elizabeth was quite worried about having Spain so close to her doorstep too. Yeah. So she had her reasons to kind of at first kind of condone it and just kind of be like, well, they're not really causing me any harm, so they can use that harbor. But Philip was not too amused at first.
No, I can imagine. So when did it sounds like it went on for a while, this conflict. When did the Dutch officially break with Spain?
So they officially broke with Spain in 1581 with the Act of Abjuration. So we've had two unions at this point. You have the Southern Netherlands, who eventually also end up staying Spanish. They've made their union, and then in response, the Northern Netherlands make the union from the Union of Utrecht, and they signed the Act of Abjuration, in which they actually officially break with Spain. The war would still last for another 60 years before they actually are fully independent and done. But that's the point where they officially say, we no longer acknowledge you as our sovereign. And if you read it now, the document is relatively conservative, but for then it was revolutionary. They came up with this theory that if a monarch does not actually govern you in your best interest, if he doesn't act like a father should do to its child, then as a country you have the right to force him out and get a better one. Yeah, so it's very much so very much that idea of a monarch should, or any leader should, act in your best interest, and then if he does, then you owe that person loyalty. Right. But if you don't, then you are fully in the right to kick them out. So that's kind of where this kind of first time that is verbalized and that is used to try and get rid of a leader. And they don't actually, it's not, some people think it's a break with monarchy. That's not necessarily the case. They were trying to get a new sovereign. They actually invited the Duke of Anjou to come over and become, because they had also had an alliance with France. Of course, also didn't like being enclosed by Spain in that way. Right. But he never made it there. He died, and the Prince of Orange, William of Orange, who had actually been the big leader of the revolt, he kind of becomes de facto leader. He'd always been sort of he was a stadtholder. He was always kind of the placeholder they were always kind of the placeholders of the kings of Spain anyway. Right. So, and he had been the de facto he had been the leader of the revolt. So it was quite natural for him to kind of to continue in that role. But originally they had tried to get a different sovereign. So that was still a step too far to then think of yourself entirely as not monarchy. That would take a couple more years before they actually become the republic that they would then remain for a couple of centuries.
Right, but it is quite forward thinking, isn't it? Just wanting a leader that obviously has your best interests at heart. So it's fascinating. Absolutely. Yeah, really fascinating. Now you've sorry, you go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you mentioned William of Orange, and I know that in 1584 he was in fact assassinated with a handgun, by the way, which I found quite interesting as well. Could you tell us about this particular event and the effect that it had on this already, sounds kind of messy political situation?
Yeah, messy's definitely the right word for it. So basically, he was killed in Delft in his own home. There's an old abbey there that they kind of set up as sort of a makeshift court. It wasn't a court in the sense that Elizabeth had a court, but more of a place where he could meet with political allies and the like in this in somewhat sense of style. And he'd actually just had dinner with a Dutch politician,
Right.
I believe. And he was walking down the stairs and he was shot 3 times. And actually, when you visit that place, it's still open for visitors. You can still see the bullet holes in the wall.
Wow, that's
Where he was shot.
amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. According to legend, his last words were, "God have pity on my soul. God have pity on these poor people."
Right.
But we now know from research that one of the bullets shot him like right through the heart, so he's dead instantly. But still that legend of him, his last words still spoken for his people. Of course, it's very remnant of a war hero essentially. And he was killed by a French kind of radical Catholic who. Because Philip had basically declared William of Orange a traitor, and that's kind of, freeing the way up for anybody to do something like this. And this guy, Balthasar Gerard, he took that seriously, and he committed this act.
Gosh.
And it was of course a major setback for the Dutch cause. They were now without a leader. They were now also without kind of a figure to look towards. William of Orange was very good at gathering people around him and having people who, even though they were from different religions or different political views, he managed to kind of bind them together in a common cause. And that have now kind of disappeared. So the kind of fragile state that the Netherlands was in just got a massive hit. And I'm pretty sure that's where Philip, of course, also declared him to be, free for all. Because if you cut off the head, the rest will surely crumble. I think that was quite much the idea behind it. But the impact was quite big.
Okay, and obviously this is something that Elizabeth and her advisors feared so much today that someone would of course try and assassinate her. So what was Elizabeth's reaction to William of Orange's assassination?
She was quite devastated.
Right.
William had of course been her ally for quite a while at this point, and just having a fellow sort of head of state killed in this way was devastating for him. And like you said, this is something that they had feared for so long. Elizabeth had so many Catholic plots, kind of at least suspected plots, aimed at her life, and she of course had also been declared by the Pope to be illegitimate, and thus setting up that road to potentially being killed. So this was kind of her worst nightmare coming through. And it actually went so far that this fear that the English Parliament actually brought in legislation that it was an offence to bring any sort of pistol near our royal palace.
Right.
Just to make sure that nobody would try and do this. Because, of course, as well, before they would always be used like poison or daggers or something like that, which is, you have to get up close and personal.
Up close, yeah, that's right.
The handgun.
Yeah.
Don't have to do that. You can be at the distance and still take a good shot. And of course we see in history later on, like plenty of politicians have ended up unfortunately getting assassinated this way. William of Orange was the first one, so they had to think of a way to try and prevent that from happening again. So it was quite a blow for her personally, and I think also just for her sense of safety in that sense.
That's right. Yeah, I did read that he was I was going to ask you that if he was the first sort of prominent kind of politician, I suppose, to be assassinated with a handgun, and it seemed, I think it was
so,
it? Yeah. Oh
gosh. Sure it was.
And so the policy that then England brought in about not having handguns near the palaces, was that a direct response to that, or is that something that had been already kind of in the works previously?
The timing of it, I would say it was in response to that. I think before, people may not have really realized, how precise they could be, and, would people really be carrying handguns around in the city or at a palace? It was very much just seen as something you had at war, you had it on the field.
Yeah.
And now it was used in a very domestic setting. Like I said, he was shot in his own house. He was just coming down the stairs, and they shot him. That they kind of realized, like, oh wait, this is actually a potential threat. We need to do something about this, and it went through Parliament very quickly. It was one of their easier decisions to make.
Yeah, right. And I can just imagine the fear this must have instilled in Elizabeth.
Absolutely. Like she's been dealing with these kind of plots based almost her entire life, I think, at this point, at least as long as she's been reigning, and then to actually have a Protestant ally, a sort of Protestant fellow head of state, be executed in this kind of way. Like, it's her worst nightmare come true. And it's always, when you see that it happens to somebody else, it makes it all the more, the threat all the more real.
Exactly,
because it apparently can be done. So that I can only imagine how afraid she must have been. And I can definitely see as well why English Parliament would have been like, we need to take some steps, because what if someone else gets a similar idea? Because once it's done, copycats very easy to follow. They could be like, oh, well, this is actually a handy idea to do. Let's try that out. So good that they immediately kind of shut that option down by bringing in that legislation.
That's fascinating, really interesting. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about Robert Dudley, so Earl of Leicester. In December 1585, he leaves for the Low Countries. Why did Elizabeth send him at that point, and what was the outcome of this particular trip?
This is actually quite interesting. So because William of Orange had been executed and they were kind of without a leader, they once again started to look for a sovereign or a protector of some sort. And they went to Elizabeth and they gave her 3 options. They asked her to become their sovereign, so to really kind of become their queen, offered a protection ship, so she would take them under their wing and give them military support, but she wouldn't actually become full queen, or she would just give them troops. And she decides to go for the middle one. She actually releases a very long pamphlet as to why she does that, in which she makes it very clear that she doesn't want to expand her kingdom in any way. She just wants to kind of protect the Dutch from making bad choices, even to kind of like not have any unworthy sovereigns come into their country. She wants to kind of protect them and help them to get on their feet. And she's going to send troops and ships and such to help them. And in exchange for that support, first of all, the Low Countries would pay her back as soon as the war was over. But she would also get a couple of cities sort of as almost as a security. She had garrisons there, and they were kind of under her control. She'd had 2 English members could be appointed in the Council of State, and she would send someone over to represent her.
Right, okay.
And that's Dudley.
That's Dudley.
That's Dudley. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting choice.
I know it is, because just to part from him, I imagine would have been tough for her.
I think it would have been very tough for her. But on the other hand, she needed someone she could trust.
Yeah.
And I think Dudley is one of those people that she felt she could trust even from a distance. That he would have her. He would always try and act in her best interest, and maybe also in a way, it was a way for him to be ambitious and have some power, but it is also as a safe distance from her own crown.
Right. So in a way, kind of appeasing him a little bit or something.
Yeah, I think so. It's like you can try, you can play leader over there.
Yeah.
You do you, and I'll be here and be queen. And so in that sense, I wonder if that's kind of, she needed to trust someone she could absolutely trust, and it may be also a way for him to be able to kind of be himself in that sense as well. So that I think that's why she sends Dudley. But unfortunately, it doesn't go too well.
Yeah.
It's quite sad. So what I find quite interesting, like, on the one hand, like, Elizabeth had really urged Dudley to take good care of the young Prince of Orange, Maurits. He was 17 when his father got killed.
Okay.
So she kind of urges him to take him under his wing, and Dudley teaches him the art of war. He also at one point asks him to accompany him to the English court, and Maurits says no. Maurits was very much a soldier, and he didn't really care for court all that much. So on one hand, he sort of takes up this fatherly role towards the young prince, but politically, it does not go very well. There's issues with religion, there's issues with trade, and also very much with his way of governing. So for trade, the Dutch continued to trade with Spain even though they were at war with them. Right. Because if you can still get into the country, you might as well make some money so you can then support your war. Yeah. The Dutch are quite practical in that regard. It's like, well, even though you're fighting with them, doesn't mean you cannot still sell them stuff.
Right.
Dudley was like, no. There have to be strict lines in this. This makes no real sense. Why are we doing that? And religion-wise, in the Netherlands, he had so many different sub-religions at that point. There were also Catholics who were against Spain. So you had to kind of keep them on your side. But the Dudley was quite a stouch Calvinist. So that kind of didn't rub people the right way. And he wanted to be more sort of absolutist leader. He was really almost trying to play a king.
Right,
And the Dutch were kind of like, no, no, we were trying to get rid of this, of having a foreign, like, actual monarch trying to govern us. We want to have a bit more self-governing and have a figure that we can rally around. And William of Orange had been that figure. He had been able to bind these people, and Dudley just kind of rubbed people the wrong way, and they didn't see him as a figure they could really rally around. So even though he was incredibly capable at his job as general, he just didn't have that charisma for the Dutch to really rally around him and see him as their leader. And in 1588, they actually managed to force him out. There's an incident. 1587, my mistake. There's an incident where two English commanders gave up the control of a settlement that they were protecting against Spain. And Johan van Oldenbarneveld takes this as a kind of an opening to try and get rid of him. So the young Maurits has been made stadtholder already, just like his father. And then van Oldenbarneveld very quickly makes him Admiral General of the Navy and Captain General of Holland as well. And this kind of taking away that power from Dudley. And essentially, it's a coup d'etat. It's essentially a coup d'etat. He's taking those functions away from Dudley and giving them to the young prince, who he knew the Dutch would rally around. If only for his father's sake. And it turns out Maurits was indeed that charismatic, he wasn't good at the whole courtly life. He wasn't about that. He was very much a general, but the Dutch needed a general. They needed someone who was really good at strategy and who had this almost this obsession with getting rid of Spain. They needed that to kind of, they needed someone who could also occasionally keep his mouth shut. And Maurits do that. And Dudley, of course, was always quite opinionated.
He was not very good at that.
He wasn't very good at that. Another name for William of Orange is William the Silent.
Yes, that's right.
And Dudley, bless him, just wasn't very good at doing that at the right times. He didn't always. He liked to speak his mind, which I think is something that Elizabeth appreciated in him, but the Dutch didn't always. So they kind of forced him out. The people obviously, of course, they were very worried that Elizabeth would then reject her support.
Yes.
Dudley would back. And would tell her, this is, the Dutch are terrible. They've mistreated me. I mean, they didn't actually like handle this in the most gracious way, of course. So you can imagine him not being too pleased himself either. But of course, Elizabeth doesn't. She continues to support the English. She continues to support the Dutch with English troops and being officially at war with Spain until her death. So and I think in that, again, you see that practicality of hers as well. That she knew she needed to protect the Netherlands against Spain, also to protect herself. So, and maybe in a way, she also knew that Dudley wasn't necessarily the easiest.
Yes.
So she maybe in a certain level feels like, okay, I can kind of see your point. I'm annoyed at you, but I can kind of see your point.
I'm just wondering what that reunion must have been like once he was recalled. Oh gosh!
Oh God, I can only imagine. Like, I would love to get if there's a report out there somewhere, I would love to read it.
That would be really wonderful, I think.
I
think he would have gotten a good dressing down. Is my
yeah. I could just see her being like, you couldn't just shut up for like 5 seconds.
That's right.
Seriously.
Oh, what an interesting period, and something we don't hear that much about. So that's really fascinating. That's really fascinating.
I think it's really cool, and I really like those international relations as well. The way countries interact with each other, and also almost on such a personal level as well. So but I would love to read anybody's report or a letter even of like how Dudley was received back at court.
Me too. So if anyone's got one out there, please let us know.
Please let us know. That would be amazing.
All right, so that was 1587. You mentioned that he comes back. All right, so in the following year, one of Elizabeth's greatest fears, and I suppose Elizabeth and all her advisors, comes to pass. So in the summer of 1588, a great fleet of Spanish ships attempts to invade England. Now, how were the Dutch involved, or what was their Yeah, what was their role in that campaign?
So their role, the original kind of role would be the Dutch revolt and English support of that, of course, if Elizabeth actually like taking them officially in her protection, was one of the reasons that the Armada was sent. Because the Duke of Palma, who at that point is the Spanish leader in the Low Countries, he had written to Philip, basically telling him, as long as England is supporting the Dutch, I cannot defeat them.
Right.
We need to cut that support off somehow. So that was one of the several reasons that Philip had to send over the fleet. But also he gives the general of that fleet instructions that they have to wait for the army of Flanders. That's the army that was sitting in the Low Countries at that point, to join the fleet, and then they would go over as like even a bigger fleet than it already was, so it can really immediately invade London and just take over the country in kind of a one fell swoop.
Right.
And the general really interprets that as you have to wait no matter what for that army to arrive. But that army is blocked by the sea baggers, the Dutch sea baggers. They close off the coast and the Duke of Palma cannot leave. And then the general interprets these orders as like, you have to wait.
Right.
So he waits. And by that point, the weather changes, the wind changes, and Drake can send his fire ships. And, you know, we know the story. The fire ships come up, they flee. There's also is a one theory that because the Dutch like to use fire ships in their own warfare, that there were some Spanish soldiers who saw the ships coming at them and kind of almost had that sort of post-traumatic stress coming up, like, oh God, because the Dutch used to put gunpowder in them as well. So if a ship came at you, there was a good chance it was going to explode.
Yeah.
So, but it's mostly the fact that, you know, they blocked that army. So it's not a very glorious contribution, but it is.
Oh, but it's still a contribution.
Still a contribution.
Yeah.
And just the fact that the general interpreted those orders that way meant that they became sitting ducks. No matter how big the fleet was, they lost their momentum.
Yeah.
He could have just gone in, cleared the way, and then bring the army over. They were big enough to do that. They didn't necessarily need the army to actually be successful. They were far bigger than the English Navy, but he'd interpreted it as you have to wait, and that's shifted the whole situation.
Isn't it so interesting how one man's, you know, perception can obviously change the whole course of history, because who knows what would have happened otherwise. Yeah. All right, Sonja, I'd love to hear about the book that you're working on.
I'm working on my first monograph. It's on Anglo-Dutch Spanish politics as discussed in English and Dutch drama in the long century. So in my book, I argue that public debates and the public sphere kind of originated quite soon because of public theatre. Public theatre gives you a space where everybody can meet and everybody can come together and hear the same arguments. Even those who might not necessarily be able to read, they can kind of get the news through news plays. They would literally put the news on the stage, or they would get certain arguments being given, because of course through a play, when you have different, you can expose different sides of the story through different characters, and people can kind of make up their minds through that. So I follow a development in that throughout the long 17th century. And I actually start with the Armada, because I think this kind of trend really started with the Elizabethan theatre, and which was of course commercial. There were several different theatre buildings in London, and they started to really draw in big crowds, and everybody could kind of attend them. Even if you didn't make a whole lot of money, you could still go see a play. And the Dutch theatre starts more as a gentleman hobby, but becomes more commercial in the way that the English one is. So you kind of see development in that, and how theatre also adapts itself to be better at that function of kind of facilitate that debate in a different way. So for that, I've done a lot of historical research as well, of course, because you need to know what was happening to see what they were thinking. So my first chapter on that is on the Armada, and it's very much about that Anglo-Dutch relations around that event as well.
How fascinating. And when will that be published?
I'm not entirely sure yet. I have a publisher who is interested, and I'm going to send them my full manuscript soon to review.
Fantastic.
It can still be, I expect at least a year before people actually read it, but it is the manuscript is almost finished, so progress is being made.
That's exciting. Yeah, that's a very exciting moment, that, definitely, after all the hard work. All right, so this has been a fantastic, like I've learnt so much from this. This is not something my area of expertise by any stretch of the imagination. So, it's been fantastic, and I think our listeners will definitely have gained a lot from it as well. But it's that time of the episode to play our game of 10 to go. Sonja, are you ready?
Yes. Yeah. As ready as I'll ever be.
Now, before I'm going to ask you what's something you love about where you live, but before I ask you that, I can hear a couple of different accents there. So can you, because I know you're in the Netherlands currently, but yes. Do you live somewhere else as well?
I also live in Belfast.
Right, so okay, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. I did my PhD at Queen's University Belfast. I graduated there in November 2017, and I've been doing some teaching there for a little bit as well. But just this last semester, I've been back in Utrecht, where I did my bachelor and my master's, to teach. So I've kind of been going back and forth between the two places. And yeah, I've picked different accents up along the way. There's a bit of Northern Irish in there. My partner is English,
right?
But I used to have an American housemate,
okay.
So I'm kind of this weird blend of accents now.
Yeah, I like it. It's lovely. So maybe I'll ask you, what's something that you loved about whether your time spent in Northern Ireland?
What I really like in Northern Ireland is the way that you can walk into a pub by yourself, and within a couple of minutes you can have a couple of friends.
Yeah.
They're very friendly, very welcoming people. Yeah, it's a very nice warm atmosphere. I like the pub as kind of almost like a second home in a way. It's such part of life just to be like, oh, we're done with work. Mm-hmm. Let's go to the pub. And you don't necessarily have to actually drink alcohol. It's just you're there with the people. It's a nice atmosphere. I really like that.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever met an Irish person that I haven't really liked. So
yeah,
I can imagine that would have been really fun. And what about your home in the Netherlands? What's something that you love about that?
What I love about the Netherlands is definitely all the bikes. Biking is such a great way of transportation. And in the Netherlands, it's our key one. It's the top one that we have. So definitely all the bikes.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Such a promotes such a healthy lifestyle, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
People that we're here in Sydney, biking is quite popular, and I think it's growing, but we just need more of the infrastructure, because a lot of the times you're on the road with the cars, and I don't like that. I don't want to be with big semi-trailers and riding your bike. No. So I think we need, once we get more of that, I think it'll definitely grow as well in popularity, absolutely. Which is great. Now, what was the last film you saw?
Oh, that's a very good question. What is the last film I saw? I think the last film I saw was on the plane. I was coming back from Washington.
Right.
I think the last film was Mary Poppins the new one.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen that one yet. Actually,
it is quite fun. It is quite. Yeah, the songs are nice, and I mean, I'm also quite a fan of Lin-Manuel Miranda, so it was really cool to see him in that as well. So it was a good plane movie.
That's right. It's good when on the airplane. It's fantastic to catch up on everything, isn't it? Lots of movie
absolutely,
time.
Absolutely. And when you have a flight of about 8 hours, it's you have the time to actually do them. But I think it was the last one that I saw. I think I saw like 6 films in total over the 2 flights.
Right. Yeah, that's good. All right. So, what is something you do to recharge?
It's a good question. It kind of depends what I'm recharging from. So if it's kind of like a work sort of slump, I love a good conference.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's really energizing to be around people who like the same stuff as you do.
Exactly. That's so true. I totally agree. That's so inspiring, isn't it?
It really is. So if it's something like that, where I'm like, oh, I'm so, I don't have any inspiration for my work, a good conference always helps. If I'm just really like physically tired, I don't think anything would beat a bubble bath, a glass of wine, and an episode of a brainless but fun TV show.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Any good TV, just be nice and warm and. Yeah, no, that's a great way to...
That sounds good to me. Now, I have to ask you the time machine question, because I love people's responses to this. So if you had a time machine and you could travel back to witness one event, only one event, hopefully, let's make it Tudor history, maybe Elizabethan, what would it be?
Ooh. Could I do one event, but from like various perspectives?
Yeah, that sounds good.
And in that case, I would love to go back to the point of the Armada.
Yeah.
would love to be actually on the Armada and see how it was like for the Spanish to go towards England. But I would also be very intrigued, like actually standing at the coast and see this gigantic fleet arrive. If they were indeed in the crescent shape that they always say that it was, like seeing the horizon filled with sails must have been so imposing and terrifying to see.
Absolutely.
I would love that, and I would love to see it from the Irish perspective as well, because after the fire ships, they had to sail around Scotland, and lots of the ships actually crashed in Ireland. So you have that perspective as well. And then I would also just be curious to be on one of those Dutch ships and blocking the army of Flanders. So I'd like to see the Armada from those
perspectives. That's a fantastic response. It's really great. Do you enjoy traveling? Do you enjoy travel?
Oh yeah, I absolutely love traveling. Yeah, absolutely.
And what's a favorite sort of holiday destination for you?
I think one of my favorite cities, also just kind of stay in kind of the Renaissance-y theme, would be Florence.
Oh right, yeah.
Florence is good food, amazing art, absolutely amazing art. Like it's of course kind of the place where the Renaissance started, and I just really like the sun.
Yeah, exactly. That's beautiful. So, I like the sound of that.
Now,
Sonja, what's a book that you're currently reading?
I'm currently reading the biography of Alexander Hamilton.
Right. Okay.
Just to kind of have something that's very different from my research, but at the same time, it doesn't stray too far from the historical topic.
Yeah, exactly.
Like to stay close to history. Before that, I just finished a book on the Medicis. So lovely. Yeah, I just really love history.
I love history. Yeah. Do you read fiction as well, or mainly non-fiction?
I do try to read fiction because I'm a comparative literature scholar. Very often of course, I end up still analyzing it by accident.
Right, yeah.
So because of that, I very much love movies and TV shows because it gives me a little bit more distance while still enjoying a good plot. But I do also read fiction. The last fiction book I read was called. It was about a pirate in Venezuela.
Oh, okay.
And someone trying to find his treasure. I think it was called Black Gold or Black Sugar or something like that. Can't remember the title right now, but it was very entertaining as well. It was a very good book. So I do read it from time to time, but it takes a little bit more mind power in that way. If I'm just trying to relax, I go for a biography or I end up watching some TV.
Exactly, nothing wrong with that. So what was a favorite movie or book of yours from your childhood?
I love the Terry Pratchett books.
Ah, yes.
Of course, absolutely loved Harry Potter.
Yeah.
I think that's just something that comes with my generation. Like you have your strong Harry Potter phase, and you don't really leave it, I think. So those would definitely be two books. The kind of books I absolutely loved as a kid.
Wonderful. And a lucky last question. What is a new skill that you'd like to acquire or learn?
I would love to finally learn French.
Yes, me too.
My brain just doesn't really want to do it. Like I can read Spanish fairly well. I've no problem with German. Yeah. But when it comes to French, my brain just goes, no. So I'd love to actually finally conquer French after all these years and actually properly learn it. I would really love that.
Yeah, that's on my bucket list. Yeah. What was the other one? Sorry.
Latin as well.
Yes.
I think that would be so useful to master. I'm sure you know yourself, and you're working on the 16th century. Having Latin can be so useful.
Absolutely, and lots of the guests have said the same thing, that Latin would be something, that would be absolutely wonderful to be able to master. Absolutely. Now, one more thing before I let you go, Sonja. It's our Tudor takeaway. So a little something for us to explore or check out after the episode. Do you have a Tudor takeaway?
Yes, so I would recommend people to look at the Rijksmuseum website. Right. They have it's the National Museum in the Netherlands, but they have this on their website. Anything that they can kind of digitalize by this point, they have done. So you have really good quality images, and you can download them, and they actually kind of encourage you to make your own sort of products with them. So you can make like a phone cover using those paintings. And I think there's even a competition where you can enter the things that you've created so they could potentially end up being sold in their shop.
Right, okay.
They have at least done that in the past. I think it's still going on. So that's a great way. And they have lots of, if you just type in Tudor in the search bar, you get lots of like various Tudor related sources. One of them is the cow painting as well.
Oh yes, the famous cow painting now.
So that's a good, nice little free thing that people can explore and find some very cool images. And another one, maybe if I can have two, can I get two?
Please.
If anybody's really interested in the Armada, I would also recommend a visit to the Ulster Museum in Belfast, where they have a continuous exhibition of Armada gold and other Armada treasure that they kind of salvaged from one of the ships near the Irish coast.
How fantastic.
So if you're interested in the Armada, that's definitely a good place to visit. It has a lot on Irish history as well. But for the Tudor take, I think that's definitely a good one. And there's some beautiful jewelry, just the riches of what was on those ships, and the cannonballs as well. So you can really kind of get a sense of what they were actually carrying. So if you happen to be in Northern Ireland, I would definitely recommend.
Well, there you go. There's a good excuse to visit, even if you don't happen to be like me. I can't wait to go to Ireland. It's there on my list. Yeah.
Free entrance, so
that's fantastic.
It's a nice cheap trip if you like it. So yeah.
Fantastic. They are two excellent takeaways, and I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you, Sonja. So thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you so much. It was really fun.
Yeah, thank you, and I wish you all the best with finishing your manuscript.
Thank you. You know yourself, writing a book is so much work.
It is a lot of work. I know exactly. So yeah, I'll be there waiting to hear the message or the tweet that says it's done. Woohoo!
Yay!
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Talking Tudors. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any comments or suggestions or just want to say hi, please get in touch with me via my website www.onthetudortrail.com, where you will also find show notes for today's episode. If you've enjoyed the show, please share the podcast with friends and family and click on the all-important follow button so you'll never miss an episode. I also invite you to join our Talking Tudors podcast group on Facebook, where you can interact with other Tudor history lovers and hear all the behind-the-scenes news. It's time now for us to re-enter the modern world. As always, I look forward to talking Tudors with you again very soon.